If Muammar Gaddafi had won the war, the political and economic landscape of Libya would have been vastly different. Gaddafi's regime was known for its authoritarian rule and lack of political freedoms. The country would have likely remained a dictatorship, with Gaddafi holding on to power indefinitely. Economically, the country would have remained heavily dependent on its oil exports. Under Gaddafi's rule, the state controlled the oil industry, and the profits were used to fund various social and economic programs. The country's GDP would have likely remained stable, but the wealth would not have been distributed equally among the population. The human rights situation in Libya would have been dire. Gaddafi's regime was notorious for its human rights abuses, including arbitrary detention, torture, and extrajudicial killings. Political dissidents and opposition figures would have been targeted and silenced. The freedom of speech and press would have been severely restricted. The international community would have likely imposed economic sanctions on Libya in response to its human rights abuses. This would have further isolated the country from the rest of the world, making it difficult for it to attract foreign investment and trade. The country's infrastructure and public services would have likely remained inadequate. Despite the country's wealth, Gaddafi's regime was criticized for failing to invest in infrastructure and public services. The majority of the population would have likely lacked access to basic services such as healthcare and education. In terms of foreign relations, Gaddafi's regime was known for its anti-Western rhetoric and support for various radical groups and governments. The country would have likely continued to support terrorist organizations and hostile regimes. The United States and its allies would have likely maintained a hostile relationship with the country. If Gaddafi had won the war, the future of Libya would have been uncertain. The country would have likely remained a dictatorship, with a poor human rights record and a lack of economic development. The population would have likely remained poor and oppressed, with little hope for a better future. The international community would have likely continued to impose sanctions and isolate the country. In conclusion, if Muammar Gaddafi had won the war, the political and economic landscape of Libya would have been vastly different.